Welcome to everybody to JFK Live with our special guest, Steve Jaffe, witness to history, I would call him. And so really looking forward to his memories, insights about the Garrison investigation. Only other business, I want to commend Chad Nagel for the continuing excellence of his series Trail of Destruction. Really eye-opening to put all of this information in one place. And I've learned as an editor, when you set Chad loose on an assignment, I mean, you can rest assured that he will track down every piece of relevant information tirelessly. So it's really been a pleasure to work with him. And I think it's really an impressive achievement. So if you haven't been following Trail of Destruction, I urge you to do so now. So,
he is quite tenacious in his research.
Yeah.
I have very good editors, very good editors. I just want to say quickly, they're pretty merciless in many ways. I mean, I am too verbose, but the many compliments that I've received from privately have said that I might want to think about making it the basis for a book. And before editing, I think I probably did have enough for a book. So I mean, maybe that's the idea, to give full vent to one's tendency to digress and explore strange avenues, because really it's so interesting. It really is so interesting. But some of these things you find, why was that redacted for so long? Why was that person's name redacted for 30 years after they died? That type of thing. And it makes you want to go and find out more. So it's a great, really, really interesting topic, and I've really enjoyed it.
You're being profiled, or at least highlighted, on the Future for Freedom Foundation, Libertarian
Future of Freedom Foundation.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Jacob Hornberger. Yeah, that's nice. Yeah, I saw some of my American Conservative articles come in through his listserv thing. So I knew that he'd noticed some of the things that I'd done, but not. And I don't know about JFK Facts. I suppose so. That too.
Do you want to share about your latest fan, or is that going to be, we can keep that a secret?
We're gonna hang on to that. Not ready to report all the developments on the political front, but I want to turn it over to Dan Storper, who arranged for Steve to come on the show, and Dan sent a little outline of all the things that Steve can tell us about, and we got a lot to talk about tonight. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Dan and tell everybody about our guest tonight.
Sure. Steve Jaffe, I've gotten to know over the last few years. He worked for Jim Garrison, and as you'll come to know, had a really remarkable series of connections to various aspects of the JFK assassination, investigation, research, etc., and is writing his own book about some of what he's done in that time and afterwards. So without further ado, here's Steve Jaffe, and I will start out by asking him to give us a little background and how he got connected to Mark Lane first, and then Jim Garrison.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you, Jeff, and Dan, and everybody. I really appreciate that you have this marvelous website, or whatever you call it. But it is a place that I've been reading for years, or it feels like years, and that Jeff has become someone who I've even seen on the mainstream media is a tribute to his mastery of the whole topic, which seems to just be endless. But in that vein, when I was 19, I was getting ready to go to UCLA, and I was getting ready to go to school, and I heard my mother scream as she prepared breakfast, but she was a good cook, so I couldn't understand why she screamed. I ran down the stairs, and she was, I can't describe it, but her histrionics indicated that something horrible had happened. And I walked past her into the breakfast room, and saw the television just breaking the graphic to show Walter Cronkite and his announcement about the Kennedy assassination, which at that time was the president had been shot. And then I didn't realize it, but my life was about to change forever. I was a film student at UCLA, and when I began to investigate, or actually at that point I was a student doing research, it started with the book Mark Lane wrote, Rush to Judgment. And I read his book, and a mutual friend of ours said that he was coming to Los Angeles, and would I go to Santa Barbara where he was lecturing, UCSB, and pick him up and listen to him lecture and bring him back to Los Angeles. And I said, yeah, I was eager to do that. I was a professional photographer and a student at the same time. And so I met Mark in the September of '66 when his book, Rush to Judgment, was first published and just shot to the #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. And I remember seeing a bookstore in Palm Springs where my parents had a kind of a little home. And the bookstore had copies not only from the floor to the ceiling, like Mary Farrell's file cabinets, but also there were people lined up outside the bookstore to get it. And Mark wasn't inside autographing them. This was just such an incredible publication that it word of mouth was incredible. I don't know if you can see me, but the credentials that Mark introduced me to Garrison, because I said to Mark, listen, I don't know how I can go to college after reading your book and listening to you lecture on this topic, but I said, I'd like to volunteer in some way to be a part of this. And so he said, well, I don't need any help, he said, but he said there's a district attorney in New Orleans who's investigating the case. And if I introduce you to him, maybe he can use your help. I made it clear that I would volunteer my services, that I didn't need to be paid. Not that my family was rich, but I was so totally dedicated to finding out who killed Kennedy that I offered my services. So not long thereafter, I wonder, can you put my picture back on the screen on my computer? Because I'm looking at my credentials and it's a little distracting. Thank you, Alex. Anyway, so Garrison came out here to raise money because the Louisiana state budget and the Orleans parish budget could not support an investigation on a federal jurisdiction, which was, and that's an issue that we can cover some other time. But anyway, he couldn't on that scale, so he had to raise money on the side. And Garrison came out here and to the home of somebody who worked as a researcher and was totally devoted to the theory that there was a conspiracy to kill the president. And her name was Maggie Fields. And she held a fundraising party, and Garrison came and made a speech which was heard by a lot of wealthy people, people that are, were Hollywood type people. And they raised a lot of money that night. And that was the night that Lane introduced me to Garrison. And Garrison said, basically, he pulled me aside and said, do you have any skills? Are you an attorney? And I said, I'm not an attorney, but I am a professional photographer and I'm studying film to become more than a professional still photographer at UCLA. And he said, well, I can definitely use you. I've got an office full of evidence that's both still photographs and film, and I don't have anybody with the skill to who would qualify to examine it. So that's how it started. I told him that I wanted to make a trip to Dallas because he asked me to come to New Orleans. And I said I wanted to make a trip to Dallas to try and photograph Dealey Plaza and everything else that we could before it got destroyed. I had the feeling that the evidence was going to be destroyed, and the evidence included the plaza, as Mark Lane's book clearly pointed out. And so I did, and I took the point of view that I should stand where every witness, every key witness that we knew of had been standing at the time on November 22nd, 1963, and see what their point of view was. So I did that, and then I went to New Orleans and gave a demonstration for Lou Ivon, and he was the chief of detectives, and the other attorneys on the case, and they, they welcomed me. At least I thought they welcomed me. And Garrison was very, very friendly. And so Garrison and I decided that I would go to work for the office. And that's how it all got started. 1967.
Yeah, so maybe just because obviously you have the photography background, you can get into that in a bit. You also, and we'll go into it later, but you also interviewed people. If you could just categorize or explain the various roles you had for Garrison.
Well, Garrison was delighted after we got rolling. He told me to think outside the box, because I told him I'd read the 26 volumes, and he was a little, he couldn't believe it. I mean, and that's not something people do. But he said, well, you understand the case, and you understand from what I learned from him what I'm up against. And so maybe you can be my West Coast office, in quotes, and you can think outside the box and do things that I can't do inside this jurisdiction and still be within the law. There was another person who wrote for Ramparts magazine, William Turner, and he was also working with us and was an official investigator and writing for Ramparts, which helped us a lot. He had been a member of the FBI, an agent for the FBI, as was Garrison, and we had a kind of a West Coast operation. So I interviewed everybody from Loren Hall, who people remember, he was actually in the Warren Report, one of the few people that they interviewed. I don't even actually know whether they interviewed him. I know they mentioned him. But I interviewed him several times, and I interviewed people like David Ferry's roommate, who came to us through a radio show that Mark and I were on here in Los Angeles. He called in and said he had something to get to Garrison, and somebody wrote down his phone number, and I called him back, and he said he'd been David Ferry's roommate. So I agreed to go out and interview him. And then I brought Mark back, and we both interviewed him and recorded his statement.
You're freezing up here.
I am. Can you hear me now? Is my the video freezing or the audio?
Oh, it's okay from my end.
You're good on my end.
Yeah, me too. I haven't seen any problems.
Okay.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. Well, Dan, either you're staring at the screen or you're you're freezing up, but either way, I'll continue. Um, the there were many witnesses all over the country and all over the world who needed to be interviewed, but with this limited budget, it was impossible for us to do that. There were people like Lauren Hall, who had some firsthand knowledge of the Operation Mongoose and ZR Rifle, and he had actually volunteered when I asked him if he'd ever heard from the people who comprised the conspiracy. He said no, but there were some people who invited us to join a team of assassins, and I volunteered because I said, "Did you do it for the money?" And he said no, but there was money on the table, and I said, "How much?" And he said $50,000 for any of us who would, volunteer to shoot the president of the United States. He was not trying to hide his participation, and he also said that he was disappointed in that, and I felt he was covering his tracks, in that he didn't get picked for the final job, or as the Howard Hunt would call it, the big event. I want to tell you that there were other people that I interviewed, but that sort of gets into different areas. I mean, there were assignments that I would come up with, like people suggesting that Clint Hill's testimony, the Secret Service agent who said he heard an echo of some kind, and it sounded like it was coming from a bunker or something like that. And that led me to, I'm not sure actually whether it was just that or somebody else mentioning that maybe somebody had fired a shot at him from the sewer. And so I went off with my cameras and film camera and two assistants and got into the sewer of Dealey Plaza on the north side of Elm Street at about 4 a.m. And I'll tell you, that's a creepy place to be in the morning when it's dark. But I couldn't bring a book and a flashlight. I had to just wait till the sun came up. And then I had rented a convertible, and I had assistants. One was driving the car and the other was in the back seat on the side where JFK had sat. And I wanted to see if I could have a clear path, as they say, to, if I had a gun, could I have shot somebody in the back seat? And after examining the sewer openings that went under Dealey Plaza, I have a diagram of it, Alex, if you want to, you can look and see there's a black diagram with white lines on it. That's the north side of Elm Street, and there's the sewer opening. This is the diagram that I got from the city and the architectural structures that go underneath Dealey Plaza. Those are the pillars of the triple underpass. And as you can see, there are pipes that go from, I can't point to it, but there are pipes that go from the sides of the street, including the north side of Elm Street, which is on the right, up, and what they actually lead to is they go underneath the grassy knoll to a position behind the fence. I know I'm getting into the weeds here, but stop me if you want. There's a photograph of me behind the fence, and that's me in, oh, hold on, go back. Yeah, that's the one. There's a photograph of me getting into the top of the opening, which leads down in a pipe. And if you go one photograph to the left, slide 9, I guess it would be, that's me in the old days. And that's me getting into one of the pipes. My shoulders were too broad for that, but a smaller person could have easily gotten into the opening and literally crawled all the way down to where the opening is on the street. So that was one of my outside the box assignments. I also went to the Carousel Club.
Actually,
and you can-
Steve, let me interrupt you for a sec.
Okay.
I dropped out for a minute or two. Did you come to the conclusion that you could fire a shot from the sewer and actually the trajectory worked?
Yeah, you could get one shot off if the limousine came as it did down that street at that speed was 11 to 11.2 miles an hour. If it was going that slowly, you could easily have gotten a shot off. It doesn't really jive with the medical evidence, but as Garrison, when he saw the photographs, he was very energized, I'll say, and he actually held a press conference and showed the photographs, particularly the point of view from the opening, which I don't have with me. It's published in a newspaper, but I can't find the original. I will, I hope, by the time I publish the book. But anyway, yes, you could fire a shot. It's the medical evidence that made me think that it's possibly not where there was a gunman.
Okay, sorry to interrupt, but you were saying about going to the Carousel Club.
Yeah, if you go, let's see, 1, 2, 3, there you go.
13?
Okay,
Yeah.
that's the Carousel Club as it looked back in the day of Jack Ruby. And if you go to the left one slide to 12, yeah, there's another shot of him in front of it with some of his employees. And I guess those are their names on the marquee. When I went to photograph it in 1967, if you go to slide 11, this is what I saw at that address. So the Dallas police didn't want Ruby's Club to remain open or anybody to gather there, and they just shut it down and put up a sign. I never found out who Houston N. Nichols was, but it does give you the feeling of more cover-up. Anyway, I'll let it go back to you, Jeff and Dan, and anybody
Yeah,
else.
I was going to ask you if going into the photography, another particular focus of yours were the backyard photos. So I wonder if you would talk about.
If you look at that Life magazine cover, ironically, the work that I did on what's known as the backyard photos or Commission Exhibit 133A and B, the work that I did was work for the DA's office, so I didn't really think about work that might be stolen, but I marked the date with a red highlighter, and the red highlighter was in the evidence that ended up being stolen from the office in a midnight raid, along with the rest of the study that I had done on whether or not these photos were legitimate or not, because as Garrison and I discussed it, I said, why don't we take Oswald at his word? And he said that he had extensive photographic experience, which we know he did in New Orleans, but we didn't even know the half of it until we learned about what he did in Natsugi. And he had a pretty devastating and impressive CIA file, which also was destroyed. But the work that I did was to simply try and show the two photographs in the original. We got the original photographs that were kept in the Dallas Police Evidence Room, and we had they made a copy for us. Well, they didn't actually make the copy for us. They made the copy, and we got it. And so I think I'm clear on that, Larry, right? Anyway, I did I did a side-by-side comparison, which will be bore you to death in my forthcoming book, because it's so detailed and so scientific. But if you look at that slide number 2, I compared 133A, which is on the right, and 133B, which is on the left. And as you can see, Oswald is standing, and if you drew a line down the post behind his head and bisected his upper lip, which I will show you in a minute, you would see that it's parallel to the post just to the left of his left shoulder. Then he tips his head slightly in 133B, and another photograph was taken. Okay, so if you look at the slide number 4, I was able to show that where the nose shadow is bisected and is parallel to the post on the left of his left shoulder, when he tips his head in 133B, his head tips slightly, but the nose shadow also goes with his upper lip. And that, as Mark Lane used to say, could only happen if there was a dual solar system. And so using that comparison and using the technology that I had available at the time, supported by Roger Craig, who is one of our witnesses and was later a dear friend of mine, who's since been killed. But anyway, using that Oswald's statement, the statement of other people in the room, when Oswald was shown this photo, he said it was a fake. And I pursued the course of that I'll go into detail in the book. And we used the technology at the time and were able to prove succinctly and fully that that was not Oswald. It wasn't his body, it was his face, just as he said. And if you look at slide number 3, you'll see that the chin in the photographs, in the backyard photographs, is hardly the same as the chin when in his booking photograph on the left. So that's just one of many different ways we were able to prove that that photograph on the cover of Life magazine was a fake. And that was a very persuasive and compelling piece of evidence for the whole world to see. And I have, for my book, I got in touch with the editor at Life magazine who was responsible for putting that on the cover, and that's number 6. And he wrote me a letter, and we were going to do a lot of work and create another documentary, but he died. He was 87 years old. His name was James Van Worgen.
Wagenborg?
Wagenborg, yeah. I have trouble with that name. Anyway, he's a very sweet man, and I wrote for Kappa, I wrote a little bit about him. So that's the study of the backyards. But now I had the backyard surveyed by a professional surveying company about it, well, within the last year. And we had scientists from all over the world.
Now you just went on mute, Steve. There you
Can
go.
you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, sorry. Anyway, we had the backyard surveyed, we had scientists examine all the work. It's pretty dry reading, but I think there's no question, along with the apology from the editor at Life magazine who was responsible for that photograph, that we have proved that somebody was trying to frame Lee Harvey Oswald. But I know you all know that. It's just that I'm going to put it between covers so that other researchers can have it.
Great.
Steve, if I could ask, so Wagenvord agreed with you that photo had been altered or doctored?
Yes, and I asked him to write me a letter. He wrote me a letter that goes from the shots are fired on November 22nd and what it happened in the Life magazine newsroom. He was in charge of buying and selling photos from the Life magazine collection for, they had 8 magazines they were linked with: Harry Match, Bild, I think, in Germany, and others, Italy, Spain, so forth. And so he wrote me a letter, and he concludes there's no doubt in his mind that photograph is a fake, and he apologized for it. He also lectured at Kappa, which is how I discovered him, and then I just called him, and we became friends after that. But we worked together for maybe a year and a half, and then he passed away.
Speaking about film, we're going to go now to Farewell America and your trip to France and securing a copy of a super high quality Zapruder film, which Garrison was able to show in the courtroom. So maybe you could get into the Farewell America story.
Okay, that's a good story. And I want to say in advance, I want to echo what Jeff said and say to Chad that I am absolutely blown away by what arrived in my email box yesterday and by the work that you did in putting together this incredible story collection, evidence. I have never seen this case laid out as clearly in my life. And in books by Talbot, Douglas, etc., who you quote. I think this is one of the most incredible pieces of work I've ever seen, and I would be eager to support or help you if in any way, shape, or form, if I could, to make this into a book.
Well,
I
thank
think
you
it's-
very much. I'm very flattered and honored and very pleased that you like it. And there's two more episodes to come, so stay tuned.
I'm from a man that worked with Jim Garrison, so you told the story better than Jim Garrison.
Oh, I wish I'd been in his courtroom. That would have been fun. But I was 2 years old. No, 4 years old.
Yeah. Well, we
Anyway.
needed you. There's no question about that. But there came a time when I don't know when exactly, but there came a time when it looked like there was no way in the world that we could outdo the masterminds who planned both the assassination and even more masterfully planned the cover-up. Garrison subpoenaed the Zapruder film from Time Life, and his subpoena was ignored, and he sent several more, and they were all ignored. And he tried to subpoena the copy from the FBI. It was ignored, I think even with a personal letter of rejection by J. Edgar Hoover. It was not possible to get the cooperation of anybody outside of the border of Louisiana. And so Garrison said to me, what you got in mind, Steve? And because we needed to get a copy of it. And I said, well, the film was bought by from the Zapruder family, at least for the use in Life magazine, by Time Life. So if we can't get a copy of it, maybe the people in other countries who do business with them, maybe they would have a copy of it and we could get it that way. And we also felt that, at least, thinking outside the box, I said, it can't be that the intelligence community of all of the European countries and Russia, that they weren't aware of the assassination, because I don't know if we knew then or if we would know at some point. I got into the whole Richard Case Nagel investigation. We knew there was an awareness of what was going on. And at one point, Charles de Gaulle, the president of France, hold on, we're going to have the Pink Panther theme for a moment. That's my wife's ringtone. Anyway, what I said is there a way that, since I'm removed to Los Angeles, that I could get somebody to go down to the Russian embassy in Mexico and make inquiries and see if they would help us? And I know that would be, anathema to the mainstream media, but if nobody ever found out about it, I'd like to make some inquiries. And not long after that discussion, we got a box from Time Life, a film box, a big, one of those old time film boxes when they used to have 35mm films. And if you opened it up, it was about 2 feet tall, but opening it up it was like a Russian doll. There was something inside, there was something inside that. And then finally we came to this reel of film, which purported to be a copy of the Zapruder film. And so we thought this was going to be the be all and end all. But when we unspooled it very carefully, wearing white gloves in the office, and we put pencils in the, and unspooled it, it was just it was just leader. I almost said fishing leader, but it was clear. There was no emulsion, it was just Time Life, messing with our heads and trying to comply with the subpoena. So we decided that my suggestion was a good one. And I sent somebody who was a former CIA agent who'd volunteered to work for our office, who had a name, and his name has been published in various different accounts, mainly William Turner's account called Rear View Mirror. I gave him the name Jim for Jim Garrison, and Rose because the Rose Bowl was coming up. And we sent him to Mexico and said, good luck, see what you can find out. He came back about a week later and told me that he'd had a meeting with a secretary, that everybody at the embassies, they're all called secretaries, and they exchanged pleasantries, but he didn't know whether he had gotten his request through or not. But he was given 2 books in English that had been translated from Russian, which were about as interesting as blank pages. I mean, it was just ridiculous, but it was some sort of token that he walked away with. And he said, I'm sorry to say, this is all I walked away with. Then about,
I thought he got a message, according to William Turner, that he got a message from, or somehow a message came through that we can't help you now, but at some point something may show up that could be of interest or help.
yeah, I forgot that Turner's version features Turner and my version will feature me. So no, you're right. We did get a message. I don't know how we got it, but I think it was probably to Jim Rose. And they said, we will be in touch with you in some fashion at another time, not too far in the future. So basically every 2 months, Garrison would come out to Los Angeles and meet with me and Turner. And often Mark Lane was there because he and I had other things that we were doing together, cases that we were working on. And Mark and I kind of became partners, where I did the media on high profile cases and he did the legal work. And we were partners right up until the day he died. Anyway, a messenger showed up at the DA's office in New Orleans, and he wasn't dressed like a messenger. He was just wearing a suit. He signed nothing. He just dropped off a package and said, "This is for the district attorney." And it contained, since we were getting a lot of mail and a lot of packages and letters with confessions and all kinds of insane things, it contained, I don't know if you can see this, but it contained 3 manuscripts, 3 volumes, a manuscript in 3 volumes, in these black binders, volume 1, 2, and 3. They were marked. And inside was a manuscript that had been typed in the Courier font, so it wasn't ready to go to press. And it was entitled, I don't know if you can see this either, but I'll put that in. Anyway, trust me, and in large 72-point letters, it was entitled "The Plot," in case you couldn't get the idea. So anyway, Garrison said that it was thrown into an office with mail, and he had to come out to visit me, and he called me from we had a system. He would call me from a hotel, but that wasn't the hotel where he was staying at. And then he would go to the hotel he was staying at, and then we had to do everything in code. And I made the mistake of calling him and saying, "I see you're staying at the Beverly Hills Hotel." And he thought that, and I think rightly so, that he was under surveillance, and so that people were listening to his phone calls. By the time I got over there, he was a little bit upset, and he'd made a list of all the things that I'd done wrong by calling him. But he said he was very happy to see me because he had just read this book and on the flight from New Orleans to Los Angeles, and that it was filled with details that only people involved in the plot could know. Things that were as sophisticated as the history that led up from the OSS to the CIA, from Truman to, I don't know who was head of the CIA at the time, but I presume it was Helms. Who was the head of when we in '69?
Yes, it was Helms. It was Helms.
Okay, thank you. Anyway, he told me about the book. We had Turner fly down. We all looked at, and inside the package was a note saying, "Call this number," and a card that said Fiduciar Bonner, which had a Geneva address and also a Paris address. And they said, "You can call us." And so I called the number, and I got the lawyer whose card was on that note. And they said, "We'll be in touch," and sent me a telegram. And I don't have a picture of the telegram, but I do have the picture of the telegram. I don't have to show you. So they said, "We want you to come to Paris right away, and we will show you the evidence that supports all of the things which are in the book. And we'd like to talk to you about publication." That was about as deep as their code went with discussion with us. So Garrison said, "This is perfect. Steve, you're not attached to New Orleans. I'll tell Ivan to advance you some money, and I want you to, call them back and tell them you're on your way, and get out there as soon as you can, and get to Paris as soon as you can." So I did, and I think in the first email I sent you, Dan and Jeff, I had some photographs of some stills that might be important here. Alex, I guess I'm talking to.
Those are-
Anyway, see what we've got there, and I'll tell you if those should be shown. Well, yeah, this one is probably the souvenir of all time from my work. If you're seeing this on the screen, I had arrived in Paris. I met with a man named Hervé Lamar, who was a French intelligence agent working for the government. And he, the next day after we had a meeting, we discussed the case in an informal way, he took me to the Elysee Palace and said that we're going to have some meetings with the people who run the French intelligence in response to inquiries that you have made. So it was from him that I guessed that maybe this was the response to Jim Rose's trip to Mexico and to the Russian embassy. But we never were able to connect the two. We never were able to get that kind of evidence. But it really wouldn't have mattered because I thought that we had to keep everything a secret, but I'll save that for you in a second. In the meantime, I met, excuse me?
What is the message from General de Gaulle? What does it say?
Well, I wrote a letter the night before I was to be picked up by Hervé Lamar and go to meet with the Secret Service, which is another word for the French intelligence. And I gave it to the man, André Ducret, whose notes I'm going to publish in the book. And he's the head of the Secret Service. And he said, hang on there, Steve. I'll be right back. And he walked out a side door in this beautiful atrium, is a gorgeous building, I'll tell you. And he came back and he said, President de Gaulle was very grateful for your letter, which he couldn't have read very quickly. I mean, maybe one page. And he gave me his card, and on it, it says, I am very moved by the confidence that you place in me.
Wow.
And so that was a souvenir thought I would never give up, but I would learn otherwise. But at least I took the time to Xerox it. And anyway, we talked for hours, and they gave me everything, details that they were aware of, from the type of German Mausers that were used in the Dealey Plaza shooting, on a more macro level, to intelligence that they had, and they weren't prepared to give us stuff we could use in court, at least at that moment in time. But and I came away, and this chat I've been saving for you and everybody. I had not planned to talk about this until later when I published my book. But in light of what Chad and Jeff and all of you and David Talbot and Jim Douglas have put together, the only name that they gave me out of that meeting, in the head of French intelligence, the head of Secret Service, was William K. Harvey. And they said that he, as far as they were concerned, was a very, very high-level key member of the team that masterminded the assassination.
But you're saying that they independently studied this?
Excuse me?
Are you saying that the French intelligence independently studied the assassination?
Yes. And so I spent the better part of 2 or 3 days there thinking I would gather all the information I could and then return to New Orleans. However, there was a strike going on. This was in early
May 68.
late May, early June. And one of the problems was that the students had begun a strike at the Sorbonne. And in France, when a strike occurs in one area, all the unions get together and everybody goes on strike. And we couldn't even make a phone call from the Hilton Hotel where I was staying, or even Lamar's many connections. We had to drive to Geneva, and we drove there during the night. And then we checked into a hotel there, and I phoned Garrison and I said to him, you know, I know this is taking longer than you wanted, but I'm actually not finished because of the problems we were having in Paris. And he said, well, you can stay there a little bit longer, but and do get as much as you can. I mean, we're not going to be sending anybody back, so do the best you can. The next morning, very early in the morning, the phone rang in our hotel room, and Hervé Lamar, this French agent, answered the phone, and he was apoplectic. I mean, he was yelling and screaming. And even though I spoke a little French, I couldn't understand what he was saying. And when he hung up, he had tears in his eyes, and he said, Bobby Kennedy has been shot. And that was the night that Bobby Kennedy had been shot. And I don't know why that was the first. When we went downstairs into the restaurant, which had a TV and a bar, and we were watching footage from the Los Angeles primary, night, where Bobby said, and on to Chicago, and then he walked into the kitchen and got his brains blown out. And I noticed, I thought it was odd for a French intelligence agent to be weeping about the American Attorney General being shot, even though it was a tragedy for me. And then later I learned that Hervé Lamar knew Bobby Kennedy, and that Bobby Kennedy was involved in getting this book written, to the extent that he used
Daniel Patrick Moynihan.
Daniel Patrick Moynihan as the head of part of the investigation that Bobby was running from Hickory Hill from day one.
But Dan, this is when we've been talking in the past about Daniel Patrick Moynihan. This is the outcome of that investigation.
Well, he was from the very beginning. He was a close ally of the Kennedy brothers, and so even I may have told this story when Oswald was caught. He tried to convince Bobby and others within the administration to send a team to protect Lee Harvey Oswald, because he was concerned that Oswald might be killed, as happens in other countries when someone is assassinated. And Bobby was too bereft to deal with it. But he basically sent several people on different tasks doing different things. It's never been proven that Moynihan, David Talbot kind of semi-confirms that Moynihan was sent on this task. But we don't have a lot of time, so we should probably keep moving along.
Okay.
But the idea also was Hervé Lamar used the pen name James Hepburn, which was based on, he's French, he loved Audrey Hepburn, J'aime Hepburn, I love Hepburn. So he was basically that guy. And then Steve met a guy who was a spy for, a very interesting guy, if you've, Philippe, a spy named Philippe, an intelligence officer for the SDCE, who Bill Turner said was Philippe Viraud de Vaugelet. And he was part of the backstory of Steve's being in Paris, and supposedly was one of the people who participated in the research for the project. But de Vaugelet defected to the US, although he'd probably been working with Angleton for a long time. So there has always been a question about the legitimacy of Farewell America. But as Steve said, the idea that Hervé freaked out when Bobby was killed does indicate that he was a legitimate, trying to make the book be a supportive effort for Bobby's run for the presidency. So if you read it, you'll see a lot of that kind of in there. And it's hard to know what Philippe de Vaugelet's role really might have been, but he's mentioned by Bill Turner as being the Philippe that Steve met with. But anyway, I think we should move on, and then we could have questions. But the last question I was going to ask you is just brief little overview of executive action.
Executive action came about because I had a PR firm and I dealt with movies and publicity for movies, and I handled various different movie stars. I was rather young, but I just got lucky, and I ended up representing people like Donald Sutherland and Richard Dreyfuss and Jane Fonda, and people who were who were activists. And Donald Sutherland was very curious about the Kennedy assassination. And I introduced him to Mark Lane, and Mark said, would you like to make a movie about it? And I kind of laughed because that's a strange question to ask in Los Angeles. Donald said, I'd be willing to pay for a script if you can put one together, and I'll see what I can do. And Donald paid whatever scale was, I think it was like $17,000 to Mark Lane and another guy. And they put together a first draft of a script. And then it was given by Donald to Edward Lewis, who was he'd made Spartacus, he'd won awards, he's one of the best producers of all time. And Edward Lewis hired me and asked me if I would be the technical advisor and an associate or supervisor producer, and would I go over to Dalton Trumbo's house and bring him all the books I could bring him to read, so that, this is a long time ago, we're talking about 1973, so that Dalton could write the final screenplay. And that's what I did, and I had 2 really great months of working with Dalton Trumbo. And then Executive Action was released, and by then Nixon was president, and it just was standing room only at the theaters in the test city that we'd picked, and we premiered. Well, that's another story. Anyway, the minute Nixon and his people heard about our film and Burt Lancaster starring in it, they knew it was a big movie, and it was made by a company, and they had it yanked. So the movie, which was very, very successful, had the one flaw of being very successful. And Nixon heard about it, made a few phone calls, and next thing you knew, we were canceled.
It was released many years later, and then it was, still successful on VHS, and did it make another return to the theaters?
Yeah, it's DVD right now, and you can buy it. Nobody seems to want to stop it.
So that's great. I think it's probably time for some questions. Jeff, do you have any? And maybe you could control the flow of questions. We can't hear you. I think you're muted, Jeff. Jeff.
Yeah, Jeff, you're muted.
Jeff, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Did Hervé Lamar tell you that he had written that book?
No, he told me that the book was a compilation of different intelligence agents who studied different areas. One was assigned to study the criminality of the behavior of Dallas police officers at the time, the relationship between the Dallas police and Jack Ruby, which was crucial. And then you can tell when you read the book that each section is written almost by different people. Hervé Lamar was in love with Audrey Hepburn because he met her once, and he put Jane Hepburn, which means I love Hepburn. So there wasn't an author.
He was probably, right, the
I know
compiler, the coordinator.
Yeah.
Peter Voskamp.
One second here.
Oh, yeah.
Peter
Here I am.
Voskamp had his hand up, and he's a JFK Facts reporter.
Yeah, hi,
Maybe
Peter.
Peter could
Hi,
ask a
Mr.
question.
Jaffe. I raised my hand when you were talking about the Oswald backyard photographs because I'd spoken to Dick Billings, and he was the life reporter who supposedly bought that negative, and he said that as far as he knew, that was an authentic negative. Did the life editor that you spoke to talk about that transaction, and did Dick Billings actually buy? Did Dick Billings know that he bought a bogus negative, or
No, no, no. Yeah, no, Dick Billings was part of, there was a competition to buy it. It took place in Zapruder's lawyer's office. I think if you read Dan Rather's account of that, he was trying to buy it for CBS, but they couldn't go as high as Billings was authorized to go. And at some point, I think the figure of $50,000 became 150,000, which is telescoping the story. But no, Life magazine, which was arguably the most powerful media source in the world, bought it, and they had no idea that it was a phony photograph. It was delivered to them, if you can believe this, but I have it in, if you go to the Kappa website, you can see previous years where James Wagenburg spoke, and he'll tell the story. And what happened was an FBI agent came to the 31st floor where the editors and the newsroom was, and asked him, was, led to him, showed him his FBI credentials and said, I have a package for you from our director. And he gave him the package, and inside were copies of the backyard photos, maybe the negative, I don't know, I think not. Because there were negatives, and then all of a sudden they were lost. But the point was that prints of the backyard photographs were given to Life magazine, and they had tremendous technical skills in terms of, photoshopping the picture, but they didn't know that it was a phony photograph, or they wouldn't have put it on the cover.
thank you.
Anybody have a question? Put your hand up, or you can write it and put it into the chat if you don't want to
Got a bunch in the chat.
speak your
Oh,
question.
should I
So
get-
just to go back for 1 second, Steve, to the
Yeah.
sewer story. So the bottom line is, it was theoretically possible that a shot came from the sewer, but there was no evidence that a shot came from the sewer, and the other evidence indicated that the shot did not come from the sewer. Is that a fair summary?
It's a fair summary. I can say that, as I said, right after I brought the photographs that I had taken to New Orleans, Jim Garrison held a press conference, and he published the photograph from the sewer, the point of view, which I think
I know,
even,
I mean,
yeah,
I ask because
The
that was
only
a
support-
catastrophic public relations mistake.
yes, absolutely, I
I-
agree. But I
Yeah.
think Garrison had such a hatred for the press that if there was something he could do to mislead them and get them off his back, he very often would do that. He didn't mind that he was being portrayed as a nutcase, because he said, that's saving my life. And he was afraid that he might be next. And all of us were afraid who worked for him. So he did that. He also, when I came back from Paris with some very substantial stuff, he said, and that included, by the way, I should add, that they later delivered to me in Los Angeles the Zapruder film, a really good copy of the Zapruder film, and told me to give it to Garrison, which I did immediately. So when I came back from Paris, he held a press conference and told the New York Times, and I have the article, that an ally of the United States had offered their intelligence, and that they were, there was a liaison between someone working for his office and it was just a, a teaser, but that he would go in front of the press once in a while and he never sought any kind of support from them. It was just more to keep them dancing.
Steve, I would disagree with you about one thing. I don't think that Garrison ever intentionally misled the press. I think my suspicion is that he felt some of these leads were important. They had potential. It wasn't conclusive, but the idea that a shot could have come from the sewer and you were showing that angle and that possibility was another thing that could be dangled as a possible way in which the assassination happened.
Yeah, thank
So
you.
I don't think it was
Thank you.
intentional to mislead.
I
So-
apologize. It
saying-
was, he had a tremendous sarcastic sense of humor. And I shouldn't blur the lines here. The truth is, he knew he was never going to get anywhere with the press. He did want to announce things basically to take the heat off of him, because they were in the hallway at the office at Broad Street. They were there every day, and they would crowd him if he came out the door. And so, yes, he would announce things from time to time to get them on, to go investigate something other than stand by his door.
Are you saying the manuscript titled The Plot is what became the book Farewell America? Or those are two separate work products?
No, that two separate work products. Executive Action was
No, he's talking about the
Money.
plot. The name of the plot is the same book as Farewell America.
Yeah, the plot is Farewell America.
Okay, so that was the manuscript, and that became published as Farewell America.
Yes, word for word. Maybe. I mean, word for word, that is Farewell America. Executive
Well,
Action
and
was
Farewell
published-
America was actually the title that Jim Garrison wanted to use for his first book, Heritage of Stone. But basically, it became a good title for those guys to use. So they took it and Jim allowed it.
Now,
Yeah.
James Buchanan did a book. I think he was in France also, right, Dan? That was the first book that came out pre-Warren Commission.
Which
Who?
book?
The book Who Killed Kennedy by James Buchanan. That came out in '64, right before the Warren Commission. I wonder if that.
I didn't read that book.
Okay. There must be
Joachim
one.
Joachim Justin. There was a guy
Yes.
named Joachim Justin called about Oswald Fall Guy or something. And
Yes, he had two books.
that was a book published in Germany. And then I think the next book was Inquest, and the next book was Rush to Judgment.
Did Joachim's book influence the French book, the French investigation, or is it built? Did it occur after? No. Okay.
No.
Bill Knight has a question.
Yes, thank you. I'm thoroughly enjoying this, and I'm enjoying the presentation, Steve, where you went offshore and you went to Paris and you got to deal with the French Secret Service. So my question is, do you think there's an opportunity in the files in the French government and in the Secret Service? Is there still opportunity to dig for more facts on the case? And I'll use an example here, and Jefferson can correct me if I might have dreamed this, I might not have heard it. But we had it was a one-off, and it was a one-off out of Finland of a file on Lee Harvey Oswald getting to Finland, but they couldn't find out how in the hell he got there. And my point is, the secret services in these other countries may have been doing more work and following the behavior of the CIA, etc., than we imagine. And I particularly believe around de Gaulle that there was going to be no assassination, that they weren't going to drill down in real detail. So having had that experience, do you think we should be following up with that stuff? Because I think I thought I saw anyway that Jefferson was going to follow up with the Finns, for example. And I think that's great. I think we shouldn't underrate that kind of one-off. And when you get to the French, I don't know if their files are open or not open, but what was your assessment? It sounded like great detail may still be within their records and files.
I totally agree. I mean, I think that we should pursue every avenue, particularly other countries which were not involved in the assassination of the president and had nothing to gain and everything to lose, as you see when, in this incredible email and potential book that Chad Nagel put together, using references to other great researchers like David and Talbot and Jim Douglas and others, and Jim Garrison. I think that we should pursue that. You gave me an idea. Actually, I have a friend in France who could do that.
Right.
But as you know, de Gaulle had said that he thought it was an inside job. He was one of the few heads of state, including himself and Haile Selassie, who came to the funeral in person. And I think that we should be pursuing this because when the failure of the Bay of Pigs occurred and Bill Harvey got involved, everything changed. And I agree with Garrison where no matter how the details shake out, it's very likely that that's the operation that led to Harvey's power and got him to, I think that those people authorized or participated in the assassination of Kennedy as a result of his apparent unwillingness to take out Castro.
Hey, Jeff, we should follow up.
Thank you.
Theory under the JFK Act, the Department of State should have followed up with the French. I don't remember Tunheim talking about that. We may want to follow up to see if there was any activity, and if not, this might be something that we could push through the Kennedy Act. As part of the next.
There's an important point I wanted to add to what Steve was saying, if you don't mind my commenting. The Jean Suetre, who many of you know, is considered to be one of the potential shooters. Obviously, not much background in the Rob Reiner podcast, but he was mentioned, and he's mentioned in a lot of projects. And he was apparently flown out of out of Dallas. And the French were very concerned because he was known to be somebody who participated and planned assassination attempts on de Gaulle. So the idea was that some of the same people who wanted to kill Kennedy also wanted to kill de Gaulle. And Suetre was a French Corsican who was one of several people probably in Dallas that day. And I think there is both concern and also interest in what was going on behind the scenes.
Right, but I want to get back to Jeff. So just for practical thing, we need to think about this offline because that could be a real avenue to get. I don't know if the ARB tried to get those records because they would have had to go through the State Department, and this is something we should explore because that's since we're in this phase of the lawsuits. Right?
Can I just also make a quick point which I think is relevant?
I think it's.
Wait, let Jeff and I finish.
I think it's a good.
Yeah, sure.
What?
Oh, sorry. Who's going?
You go ahead, Chad.
Okay, I just wanted to say a few episodes ago, I think it was the 7th one in this Trail of Destruction, the Defense Intelligence Agency story about how they destroyed their whole, I think they called it the diplomatic tape, right? So from all over the world, any, embassy that was doing that talked about JFK at all, or did an investigation, I would assume that some French legations might have been involved. The Bill Harvey thing with the CIA refusing to hand over his travel vouchers, any country that, and Dan Hardway said that we had memos indicating he was flying around a lot in the months leading up to the assassination. It's possible that as part of their investigation, a foreign government could have retained travel records for Bill Harvey.
Yeah, these are all things. So again, we have the ability under the JFK, at least the ARB had the ability under the JFK Act to seek records from foreign countries. They were stymied with Cuba. They were stymied by Mexico, but by the State Department. And I'm just curious to see if they got stymied in with the State Department with France. But if they did, this is we have an avenue that we could pursue. I'm just wanted to
Yes, agreed.
Yeah.
Carl's had his hand up.
Thanks, Jeff. Absolutely fascinating conversation. So glad that Mr. Jaffe's on tonight. Sir, in your dealings with the French, did you ever get any inclination that there might be a different version of the Z film? I keep hearing things about the French version.
Yeah.
And sort of in conjunction with that, have you seen Dino Brugione's comments about the Z film? There's a little controversy about that.
No.
He basically said that two different versions of the Z film during the weekend of the assassination were brought to NPIC, you know, the government's top secret photographic facility. And two different sets of briefing boards were made, and
True.
he, you know, he
That's
said
true.
some frames were removed from the extant version, or at least what we know today to be the extant version. I just wondered what your take on all that was.
Well, there are memos that I think just one memo that I wrote about my feelings about the Zapruder film. And I did, you know, the French, they said, what can we give you other than the evidence I had already asked for? And I said, how about a copy of the Zapruder film? Because you have one at Perry Match and we can't get it. And so they said, okay, we're not going to give it to you now, but we'll have someone deliver it to you in your home in Los Angeles once you're safely home. Otherwise, they'll just intercept you and take everything you've got. So, you know, I learned a lot in that trip, and they did indeed deliver a copy to me that seemed to be an excellent copy, certainly in terms of the color and the film. It was beyond anything I could have imagined. So it must have been an early generation copy. On the other hand, people talk extensively about the examination of the frames and so forth. And people like Tink Thompson, he's much more equipped to talk about that than I am. And having written 6 Seconds in Dallas and The Last Second in Dallas, those are the books we need to look to for tampering. I felt, and I think I know Mark agreed, that it's so obvious that he was hit by a shot from the front that basically, if you show a jury that film, you're not going to have to deal with the missing frames. But I acknowledge it as an area of examination and forensic study.
Jeff, we got Chad Ford. He's got a question.
Yeah, Chad Ford.
Tom.
Yes, my question is for Steve. In your time with the Garrison investigation, did you confirm that Ruby and Oswald and Ferry all knew each other, and were any of those linked to the Marcello organization?
Can you hear me? Is in terms of the areas that I was studying, and the only time that I got into that kind of examination had to do with Raymond Broshears, who had been the roommate for years, or I don't know what I wrote in the memos. It's actually still survives. I have copies of those memos, but Broshears confirmed that Ferry and Oswald were close. I don't think that's really debated. Ferry and Oswald were seen together in photographs that the DA had in the office. And also, Ferry and Oswald worked with Bannister in that famous 544 Camp Street office that was also 531 Lafayette Street. So I don't know about the other links, because it just wasn't part of my work.
Hey, Steve, can I just quickly go back to something I forgot to ask you about Roger Craig's comments? And because he seemed to be an important witness, do you have anything to share about what he said in conversations with you?
Yeah, everything that you can see on YouTube, which he was filmed in any interview saying, was consistent with his under oath testimony under penalty of perjury. And also, Mark Lane made a documentary called Two Men in Dallas. And that film is, I think, available, or somebody can make copies of it. I also have the rights to Rush to Judgment, the film, and Mark Lane has turned that over to me for as long as I make it, and then I'll turn it over to somebody else. But the question was, I've forgotten the question.
Roger Craig, if he said anything
Craig.
to you that.
Yeah, Roger Craig, you'll see, is almost in every description of what went on when Oswald was being interrogated during that 12-hour period in Fritz's office. You don't have a record of Roger Craig being there, but he was there, and he filled out reports and turned them in to Decker, and Decker got rid of those reports. And but he was there. He identified Oswald, having seen him depart the scene, not the way that we've been told by the Warren Commission, but then not much by the Warren Commission is true. Anyway, Roger Craig is a crucial witness. There was an attempt to kill him at least 4 times that I know of, and in the 4th time succeeded. But he was a wonderful guy, and as honest as the day is long.
Are you releasing a new version of Rush to Judgment? Is that what you said?
No, I have to sort out some legal problems, but I own whatever Mark Lane owned in terms of the film, the documentary, and we are in the process. I'm continuing the process since Mark died of doing what amounts to a Rush to Judgment 2, and that's a film in its raw form that I allowed Kappa to have, and people can go to the Kappa website. I just said, you can draw people to your website by offering this film for free. And so that's as much as we got done. It was a really good interview with Abraham Bolden, and a lot of other things that bring people up to date, and some of the old film as well.
Fernand Amandi has his hand up. Fernand.
Good evening, Steve. Just curious about one particular aspect of the Garrison investigation, and it was the attempted penetration by Bernardo de Torres, who was someone very involved in the milieu of CIA operations. He was a Bay of Pigs veteran, later on claimed to be not only in Dallas and Dealey Plaza, but was one of the folks taking films and photographs of the incident. Did you and Jim Garrison ever come to a conclusion about what you thought that effort was when he presented himself as a good faith investigator who was actually working to steal and sabotage information in the investigation?
No, I mean, I'm sure Jim Garrison had his impressions, but he didn't share them with me, and I didn't know about that aspect of de Torres.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Bill Knight.
A little longer than usual, but it's well worth it in this case. So anybody?
Bill Knight. I have, he has a, okay, well, I don't know what that is.
Were there any others listed, any other assassins that the French listed, or any other participants?
No.
Hey, I'm just looking through the chat.
Okay.
Um,
Oh, yeah, boy, there's a lot of people in the chat room.
But yeah, you answered a lot of the questions.
This might turn into the longest session of all time.
So Steve, tell us what are your plans for publication? When might you publish your account of these events?
Well, what's funny is that there's a company that publishes a lot of books about the Kennedy assassination, so that to be published by that company almost dilutes the importance of a book. And since mine has a lot to do with some scientific evidence that is, that would eliminate Oswald as the assassin, but also prove that he was framed, I'm really concerned about getting the right kind of attention to that part of my publication. The rest is basically a memoir with evidentiary support. So I may end up having to publish it myself and then market it in every way I can possibly do that.
You're
I do
referring to
have
Skyhorse?
background.
You're referring to Skyhorse Publishing? Is that the one?
Excuse me? Yeah, I'm referring to Skyhorse.
Um,
They've indicated they're interested, but I'm not interested in the time it takes. It takes about 6 months to go from submitting a manuscript that they want to publish to publication. And they don't offer you any support in terms of marketing and publicity. I've done publicity for Joe Esterhaus and Dalton Trumbo and other writers, Mark Lane, and I think I can do that as well myself. So hopefully we'll get it out, but I want to wait until after the election.
Jeff, Don Friday's got his hand up.
Yeah, one more question, Don.
Yes.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Jaffe. I'd like to thank you for all that work, and Garrison in that investigation. It was, I mean, to me, that was very heroic, the whole effort, and what was, what he was going against and what you all were facing. So I really appreciate, from a historical perspective, just your abilities to push through that and get through that. So my one question was, I read somewhere where Mr. Garrison provided a bunch of his files to someone to store in his garage or something. Was that you, or was that someone else?
No, I know that he gave a lot of documents, and his family gave a lot of documents to John Barber, who I helped produce his documentary, The Garrison Tapes, the Kennedy assassination. And then he did a sequel, The Second Assassination of JFK, having to do with the media and their abominable role in pushing forward the Warren Commission theory. But I don't think that Jim ever put, he put what he wanted to in between hardcovers and got it out. And that's why you have Heritage of Stone and On the Trail of the Assassins.
There were some files that were given by Garrison for safekeeping to a friend whose name I can't remember, a woman who was part of the background of the investigation. And the files, who knows if they were kept intact. They were sold at auction about 3 or maybe 4 or 5 years ago and into private hands. So we're not sure what's there.
I thought I read somewhere where some of his files were, he wanted them secure or separated, and he secured them with one of his friends, and they were stolen. And this was well after the investigation. I have to go back and make sure I read that correctly, but that's what I thought I read somewhere. So, but I'm sorry, go ahead.
Next time I could probably get her. I'll give you the name of the woman who had them, and it's possible that some were stolen. She was not the most careful person.
Yeah.
Steve, did you say that Lauren Hall said that he was trained as part of a team to kill the president, or that he was trained just on one of those assassination scenes with Castro?
No, he was trained to assassinate Castro, to put it oversimplify it. But yeah, he was part of the people who were trained at Lake Pontchartrain and the other anti-Castro Cubans who were being trained under Harvey and others to invade Cuba with the blessing of the Eisenhower administration that unfortunately, they kind of squeezed JFK into his tacit approval. And then when JFK didn't want it to happen anymore, they just stopped telling him what was happening. And as you, Chad, had put together, and you and Jeff put together in these papers, the whole team involved Harvey as the point man to get weapons and shooters. And at one point, I think Talbot's book says that 60 commandos were sent into Cuba just on one raid. The guy Jim Rose, who I told you about, he flew a small plane with bombs on it to try and bomb Castro. So there were all kinds of things going on, and they just stopped telling Bobby what they were doing because Bobby was furious when he found out.
Did you ever come across that film that Bob Tannenbaum said there was out there about Lee Oswald in one of the training camps?
No.
Did you have any interactions with the HSCA?
I don't think I had any interactions directly. I'm friends with Bob Groden, and in my book, I'm going to deal with that document, which is a memo from McCone to the head of the Secret Service. The document which says that Subject Oswald was trained by Naval Intelligence, and it just passed over. I did get involved in trying to nail that down. I talked to Bob Tannenbaum about it, and you know who he is. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Did you look into Permindex at all? Were you involved in that?
I'm aware of it, and I've read a lot about it. I wasn't involved in investigating that connection.
Bob Saltzman has a question in the chat. I guess, Jeff, this will be the last one. Bob says, any comment about backyard photo work done by Jack White?
Well, Jack White was the beneficiary, and I'm not blaming him at all because I know people who knew him. And but he was the beneficiary of all of the work that I did that I just turned into Garrison in my files. And when you see when you see the prints, the black and white prints, and you see red or blue transparencies of them that we use as overlays to prove a point, that was all my work, and he turned it into a commercial enterprise. And I thought, terrific. I wasn't planning to write a book, or I didn't care whether my name was on it.
Jeff, we have David Cannon put his hand up again. You want to?
Yes. I wanted to ask you about Alberto Fowler. Did you have a relationship with him?
With whom?
Alberto Fowler, Fowler, who was supposed to have been involved with the Garrison investigation.
Nope, I did not. Didn't know him.
Okay.
I think we should probably try to wrap it up.
Yeah.
Thank you, Steve. This was really wonderful. You did a great job and great presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. And
I
I
second that.
hope all of you will continue to do your own work. I especially like to talk to Chad about his plans, and Jeff. And I'm here when you need me. I'm more than happy to participate.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Everyone have a
Take
great
care,
day.
guys.
We'll see you next week.